idea that we're very much controlled in life and in the things that we do. Where did he first come to that conclusion? Tell us the basis of all that.
Well, it kind of goes on from what you've been talking about so far, actually, from what I've been hearing. For me, we draw to us what we need to experience to evolve. I call it designer evolution.
Right.
And we draw to us what we need to experience to do whatever we're doing in this particular life. And the massive ridicule and condemnation I got in the early 1990s, seen in the moment was a nightmare, but seen with hindsight was a fantastic thing for me in two ways. One, it set me free of the biggest prison that most people live in, which is the fear of what other people think.
Right.
Most people are not living their life. They're not speaking their truth if it's at odds with the norm, because they're frightened of the consequences of being different in a world of uniformity. So most people are living their life on the basis of what they think others think they ought to be. I realized what a prison that was, and also the potential there was, therefore, to control people if you got them in that state, for reasons I'm sure we'll come to. The other thing that conclusion I came to at that time, for many reasons, was I realized from my own extreme experience how easy it was to get vast numbers of people to believe anything, so long as you told them the same thing often enough.
Right.
I am still, for instance, reading, because of this Glenn Hoddle thing in the last few days, that I've discovered for religion. Religion, for me, and everyone has their right to their opinion. To me, religion, the greatest form of mind control ever invented, at its most extreme, psychological fascism. Religion, for me, is a plague on the human mind. Next time you read a national newspaper, you will see Icke, the nutter who discovered religion. So I realized that it didn't really matter what someone really thought. It mattered what the media said they thought and believed, because that's what most people would think they believed.
You're kind of starting with this idea, though, and let's just get this out of the way now, because we're about to get calls about this. Remind everyone of the number, 0500 10 53 89, if you've got a question you want to put down.
The point being, though, Dave, just quickly, is that if you create that situation where you can get vast numbers of people to think the way you want them to think, then the potential for control from the center is absolutely vast, because you cannot control billions of people physically. There's too many people.
Sure.
What you have to do, if you want to control the mass of the population and therefore control the direction the world goes to more and more centralization of power, which we're seeing every day, is you've got to get them to think the way you want them to think, preferably not to think at all.
Right.
And crucially, you have got to get them to police each other.
Right.
And this is what we do. If you take the symbolism or the analogy of the herd of sheep, there's two states of being that control a herd of sheep all over the world every day. One is the bar mentality, where most of them just follow the one in front because it's in front. And then there's, for the few that don't want to follow the one in front, there's the fear mentality, symbolized by the sheepdog that comes, rounds up the ones that are straggling. And that combination of bar and fear gets vast numbers of sheep exactly where one farmer and a sheepdog wants them every day. Now, if you look at the human expression of that, we've also fallen into this trap of bar and fear. Most people follow the one in front. He's got letters after his name, our Dave. He must know what he's talking about.
Right.
Well, he's the president and all this stuff. And then you've got the few who realize the limitation and the nonsense that we're being. But most of them, they still concede their uniqueness to that, keep their head down and their mouth shut, because they fear the consequences of speaking out against the norms. Now, what this means, in fact, is that the human herd, as you might put it, has actually out-sheep the sheep, because we dispense with the sheepdog. We don't even need one of them. We police each other. And this is where, I was talking on a television program the other night, this is where we get to this so important point, that it's become a crime to be different. And once it becomes a crime to be different, it means whoever sets the norms runs the world. Because most people will live their life within those norms because they don't think for themselves. And the ones that realize the limitations of the norms, most of them will still live their lives within them because they fear the consequences of not doing that, which leaves a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the population who were prepared not just to look and identify the limitations of the manipulation, but actually stand up and speak out about it. So what we're looking at, in my view, and I put tremendous amounts of information about this in my books, we're looking at a situation where the world's actually controlled by a tiny few people, interbreeding bloodlines, in truth, going back a very, very long time. And they do it by manipulating the way people think and feel, and by getting the people to police each other.
For what purpose?
Well, the biggest secret, the new book, is 550 pages long, and it goes into great detail about the background to this and what's actually happening. But what I would say to you is that what I do, I do not have any preconceived ideas or preconceived notions. I just let information be my guide. I follow the information.
Right.
And where the information has led me, which I've gathered all over the world, I mean, I've spoken in 20 countries in the last 2 years, is in an area that is so extreme, so bizarre, and so staggering from the perspective of life that we have in what we call the normal world, that people have to read about it in the book if they're interested, because if I talked about it in a few lines on the radio, it would sound so bizarre. People just wouldn't take it. They have to see the massive documentation in the book to see that this is actually they're almost hysterically ridiculous. It's actually happening.
Okay, but there is, and there has been this idea, this kind of conspiracy theory idea that we're all that basically running governments, running big businesses. There are, I mean, the X-Files have exploited this to the hilt, haven't they, in all their programs? That there is this small group of people that control everything. They even control and pull the strings of government. They pull the string of the major banks in the world. But to what end? Just to get rich, or? Well,
that's what the biggest secret is. What it's all about. And like I said, Dave, if I start talking about that here, it would sound ridiculous to many people. They have to see in the book with the documentation, so that they can see that actually it's supportable by the evidence, and it's an enormous amount of evidence. What I would say is this,
because you talked about this in previous books as well, haven't you?
Sure, but not in the way the biggest secret does.
All right.
What I would say is this, that what I've basically identified, it's bigger than this, but in simple terms, I've identified that in the ancient world, literally thousands of years ago, a group of interbreeding bloodlines going under different names emerged out of the Middle and Near East, what we now call Turkey, the Caucasus Mountains, Iraq, Iran, that kind of area. And one of their expressions was the Phoenicians, and there were other names for them. These particular bloodlines eventually moved into Europe and became what we call the European aristocracy and the royal families, or actually royal family of Europe, because it's actually one family, if the truth be told. Particularly after William of Orange, one of these bloodlines, became King of England in 1688, 1689. These bloodlines epicentered their operation on London.
Right.
After this, we got the Bank of England. That was signed by, the charter was signed by William of Orange, and London became the big financial center of the world. As the years passed on, of course, out of these small islands, which you can hardly see on the globe, came what we call the Great British Empire. And when I was a kid, I used to think, how come these islands you can hardly see on the globe had an empire that spanned the world? Well, what I realize now from the research is that it wasn't actually the British Empire. It was the empire of this network I call the Brotherhood that had based itself in London. If they'd based themselves in Amsterdam, it would have been the Great Dutch Empire.
Right.
And what happened as a result of this so-called British Empire is that these bloodlines were able then to export themselves all over the world, to America, to Australia, New Zealand, to Africa, etc. And again, when you do the genealogy today, you find that the vast majority of the key people in positions of power are actually from the same bloodlines that go back to the European royal and aristocratic families. Some genealogical research that I came across in America, and indeed through Burke's peerage also, was that it's a staggering statistic, I think it is anyway. Every single United States presidential election since and including the first one, George Washington in 1789, has been won by the candidate with the most European royal genes, particularly British and French.
Right.
We've had 42 presidents with Clinton. 33 of them are genetically related to two people, England's King Alfred the Great and Charlemagne, the most famous monarch of France from the 9th century.
All right, let me stop you there for a second, because we've got to take a break, but we'll come back and continue that in just a moment, and we'll take some calls. 0500 10 53 89, if you've got any questions.
Starts a hysteria, which in the end did for Glenn Hoddle. And you see this all the time. And so often you see this process where through the media comes a mantra message saying this is what the situation is, this person's terrible, and all this stuff. This then eventually, for large tracts of people, becomes what we call public opinion. Public opinion then starts to affect political opinion. And in many ways, the Glenn Hoddle situation encapsulated this, because we saw this. Suddenly the Prime Minister and
well, everybody bought their two pence,
sports minister,
really?
they were all saying things that went along with the line.
Right.
And it's so easy, because when you think about it, well, how do we make decisions in our lives about how we perceive people and how we perceive events? We look at the information available on that person or event, and we make a decision based on what we see. Now, if you constantly pound out one side of the story, i.e., in this example, Glenn Hoddle's a horrible man who has said terrible things about disabled people, without putting the other side, which is that he could have chosen his words better, but actually he's a decent man with a big heart, then vast numbers of people are actually going to take that imbalanced information that's coming their way about that person and make an imbalanced decision on what they think of him.
But that suggests that the media are being manipulated to say that in the first place. Do you believe that's what's happened? Or do you believe that's what happens generally?
Well, two things happen. First of all, there are people in the media, particularly at ownership level, who do manipulate information. Absolutely.
Are they part of these bloodlines? Are they part of this power structure?
I would say that when you get to the key positions in the media, like ownership level, and again, you have to ask not just about the Murdochs and the Turners and the Packers, but who owns them?
Who does own them?
Well, I mean, who owns any business in the end if they want to keep expanding and expanding? The banks do.
Right.
And if at some point we get onto the situation over money and the way the banks actually manipulate the world, I mean, people who haven't studied this will be absolutely staggered.
I do want to go on to that
about this. But the point that I'm kind of making here is that there's two kind of ways that the media manipulate. There's one in which it's knowingly done, and then there's this other way. Again, when you're talking to people and you're talking about the media manipulating, they say, oh, so you're saying every journalist's in on it? Of course not. Right. Of course not. But what does the media do? We're back to these norms again. The media at any point in time takes as its point of reference from how it judges people, whether they're mad or intelligent or bad or whatever. They take as their point of reference whatever the norm is in society at that time. Therefore, some centuries ago, if we'd have had today's media, they would have ridiculed and condemned anyone who said the Earth was a sphere, because the norm at that time was that it was flat. So what we see today is another version of that. Anyone in the public arena who says anything that is different to the norm is immediately jumped upon by the media, which is taking the norm as its point of reference. And so the vast majority of journalists are not knowingly manipulating, but because of this perpetuation of norms that the media comes from and its point of reference, it's constantly undermining anyone who says or does anything that's different. So it's constantly, if you like, policing the prison for anyone in the public domain.
There's one thing here, though. That, you know, if the bloodline and the power has been with the royal families throughout the centuries, I mean, have they lost it now? Because if you talk about the media and the royal family over the last 10 years, 5 years, there's been a major change. We've seen front page headlines telling the Queen she's wrong and she's, terrible, and you wouldn't have seen that 20 years ago. It would have been outrageous. What's happened that's changed? What's happened that's changed that power then?
Well, that's a good point. What I would emphasise to you is it's about bloodline.
Right. So is our Queen part of this? Is our royal family here?
Absolutely. I mean, when the Queen reads The Biggest Secret, I'm going to lose my knighthood. That's absolutely certain. I'll certainly not get a Christmas card next year,
right?
To say the very least. But the emphasis is on bloodline. Now, for a while, as the centuries unfolded, the bloodlines worked overwhelmingly through what we would call the aristocracy and the royal families. But the bloodlines are just about control, and they will express themselves in any form necessary to control. Now, as the world has evolved into the modern situation that we see, the power has gone into the hands of the business and the bankers and stuff like that. So increasingly these bloodlines have moved into that. One of the ones that's key ones, or not top of the pyramid, but significant ones, that is still in that royal realm, are the Windsors. And the Windsors are at the level of the Queen, Prince Philip, people like that. They're knowingly part of this, absolutely. And if people do get around to reading The Biggest Secret, it will make their hair curl in terms of what the royal family's really into and all that stuff.
We're going to take another break. We'll come back and we'll take some calls. Alice and Greg and others too. 0500
Talk Radio. Across the UK on 1053 and 1089 AM medium wave.
It's the Dave Barrett Show for a Saturday night. David Icke is my guest. His new book, The Biggest Secret, is about to be published. And one of the things that David talks about in that book is that Diana, Princess of Wales, was murdered. And we will talk about that fairly shortly on the programme. But I want to take some calls first. And we're going to go to Alice, who's in Southampton. Alice, hi, you're on Talk Radio. What did you want to ask? Hi, hang on, let's try again. Hi, Alice, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Hi, welcome to the show. What did you want to say?
Thank you. I was talking to you, but I wasn't.
We can hear you now. Far away.
All right. I used to have a talk show, David, in the United States.
Right.
And we used to talk a lot about the Trilateralists.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are these connected in any way?
What are they? Tell me what they are first, because I don't know what you're talking about.
David, you don't know?
This is Dave Barrett talking. I'm not sure what they are, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners won't know what they are. What are the Trilateralists? Or maybe David can tell
I can talk about that.
Okay, go on, David, tell us what they are.
Okay, I can talk about this at great length.
Try not to do it too.
I can talk about anything at great length, you know. Asking me to be short is like asking me to walk the channel, really, which apparently I can do according to the papers a few years ago. The Trilateral Commission is part of a network of interconnecting organizations which are coordinating the same agenda between apparently unconnected areas of our lives, like banking, politics, business, military, NATO, intelligence agencies, etc. And the Trilateral Commission was set up by the Rockefellers, who are the bloodline branch managers, if you like, in America.
Right.
In 1972-73. And it's part of a network which includes the Bilderberg Group that was set up at a meeting in Oosterbeek, Holland in May 1954. The Council on Foreign Relations, which is an organization that runs foreign policy and indeed most of domestic policy in America, and another one called the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. And these coordinate between, as I say, apparently unconnected areas of our lives. And I'll give you one example of how this hidden hand of these organizations works behind the scenes, with most people not realizing there's any connection. One of the events that they created in recent years was the Bosnian conflict. And it's kind of interesting, and just a coincidence, of course, that when you look at all the major peace negotiators throughout the Bosnian conflict, they have these organizations in common.
Right.
The European Union, first of all, appointed Lord Carrington, chairman of the Bilderberg Group since 1991, Trilateral Commission member, president of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. When he failed to achieve peace, they put in David Owen, Bilderberg Group Trilateral Commission. When he failed to achieve peace, they replaced him with Carl Bildt, former Swedish Prime Minister, Bilderberg Group. At the same time, the United Nations was appointing peace negotiators who were working with the European Union ones. They first appointed Cyrus Vance, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. The war went on, so they appointed Thorvald Stoltenberg, a Norwegian, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group.
What are they trying to achieve or not to achieve here, then? Not to stop the war?
Well, the point that we need to look at, if we're going to stop being manipulated and passed off with the party line, is we've got to start looking at the connections between people, and then we've got to start looking at going to these people and these organizations and saying, excuse me, little word in the shell like here. Why are all these people you're appointing members of the same organizations? What are these organizations? What's going on here? And Richard Holbrooke, who in the end was the guy who negotiated the Dayton Agreement that created the World Army in Bosnia, in effect, the NATO 60,000 strong peacekeeping force. Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. Bill Clinton, exactly the same. You look at Jimmy Carter, who was brought from nowhere as an independent peace negotiator during all that. First Trilateral Commission President of the United States, Council on Foreign Relations member. Cole Bildt, who's running or was appointed to run the civilian operation in Bosnia, Bilderberg Group. The first head of the World Army.
So it goes on and on and on, basically.
The first head of the World Army in Bosnia was Admiral Leighton Smith, Council on Foreign Relations. Now, what I say to people is, where have you heard this before? Who's told you this? Well, I tell you, the Washington Post won't tell you because it's owned by Catherine Graham, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay, Alice, what do you
The
make?
Telegraph won't tell you because it's owned by Conrad Black, one of the inner core members of the Bilderberg Group.
Okay.
These are the coordinating bodies, Dave, that are orchestrating events through apparently unconnected people, and this is what we need to know.
All right, Alice, what's your take on this, Alice?
I beg your pardon?
What do you make of all this? Do you agree with David on this?
Yes, I do. And Barry Goldwater was a trilateralist.
Right.
And, yes, I believe in it. I believe it's true.
Okay.
No question about it.
Okay, Alice, thank you for that. A good question. Let's go to Glenn, who's in Oxford now. Glenn, hi, you're on Talk Radio. What's your question?
Hello, Dave.
Hi.
It's a terrific show, let me say. It's really great that there's somewhere these sort of issues can be discussed on the radio.
Good.
Forgive Kelvin for the sun. I wonder if I could just ask David Icke a question.
Please do.
I've read all your books, David, and I found them very thoughtful, very interesting, and I think there's a great deal of truth in what you say.
Thank you.
And they're absolutely fascinating. One thing that's puzzled me is how it is that when the Brotherhood, as you say, own the media and censor everything that appears on it, how it is that you're actually able to come on the media and expose their schemes and plots.
If I get the sack next week, you'll know why.
Well, Glenn, simple answer to that. I don't say that they control everything that goes out in the media. What they do control is the 99.9% of the information that people kind of hear because of either manipulation on purpose or because the media just defends the status quo and judges everyone on the basis of it. And if you look at the number of times that you just made the point yourself when you came on, if you look at the number of times these issues we're discussing tonight are discussed in the media globally, compared with the daily, minute-by-minute bombardment of a very different story, then, of course, it's the tidal wave against the trickle. And they can't put a complete dike around information, but they can put a very, very powerful one around because these things are hardly talked about in the media.
Okay, thank you, Glenn, for that question. 0500 10 53 89. David Icke is my guest tonight. So much to talk about here. David is in Fife. He's got a question for you. David, hi, you're on Talk Radio.
Hello. Can I put a question to David Icke,
please? Please do.
Yes, hello, Dave.
Hello, mate.
Yes, I can think off the top of my head of three of the most powerful men in the world, Bill Gates, Richard Branson and Rupert Murdoch, are all self-made men who come from poor working-class backgrounds. Now, how does that square with your theory of a bloodline descended from the ruling classes of Europe?
That's a good question.
Well, first of all, I would question massively that Richard Branson is one of the most powerful men in the world. I really would.
Maybe quite well off, but
I would seriously question that. But let me put it this way. The people who control the financial system of the world are not moving millions around the world every day. They're moving trillions around the world every day. They can make or break a company anytime they want. If they want to start a run on Murdoch's empire, they'll start a run on it. If they want to start a run on Bill Gates' empire, they'll start a run on it. Compared with these guys, these two fellas are pawns in a game. They're small fry, staggering as that may seem, compared with the financial clout that the people who control the financial system have.
Would they be in on it? Once you get to be super rich, because a lot of this is about money, and money and power being connected as well, isn't it? If you suddenly become super rich like a Bill Gates, does that mean you suddenly get brought into this inner group, or is it only through bloodline that you get there?
There's two things. The key bloodlines that I'm talking about are the ones that are absolutely really in control. Right. They're the ones that move the trillions around the world. Okay. They're the ones that call the shots. Right. Now, there are other people who are pawns of these bloodlines, and I suspect very much that Bill Gates and Rupert Murdoch would probably come under that category, who, as long as they play the game and do as they're told, then they'll keep their empires and they'll keep their apparent power. But once they start going against that, bingo, they are moved out. I
think David wants to come back. Go on, David. Yeah.
Are you seriously expecting us to believe that Bill Gates, who owns Microsoft, the most powerful computer company in the world, and that Rupert Murdoch, who owns the most powerful information broadcasting system in the world, News International, are pawns in a game that can simply be snapped at will by strange powers that control everything in the world?
How does Rupert Murdoch... First of all, let me make the point. I'm not asking you to believe absolutely anything. I mean, what people think of what I say and what people think of me is none of my business. I'm just putting out information. I'm not trying to persuade anyone of anything. I'm just putting out information you don't normally hear and a view you don't normally hear, and I think that's a very good thing in what we call laughingly a free country and a free society. But how does Murdoch expand the empire he has to the point where he has a potential audience, the last time I heard, of some 3 billion people on a planet of some 5 billion people? How does he pay for that?
He's obviously built on his successes that he first of all made by starting his company.
Where does he get the money from,
no idea how he started his company. I mean, that's a different question. I don't know how he's a self-made man, but the fact is that he is a self-made man.
Where does he get the money from now, though, in order to is that what you're saying, David?
Yeah. Where does the money come from? How does he finance this expansion?
Well, presumably from people that pay for, the Sky Sports.
He does it through the banks. And who controls the banks? In the end, the world is controlled and business is controlled, and Gates and Murdoch and all these apparent top-of-the-pyramid empire builders are based on the banks. They control the business and they control the financial system. Okay. So I ask you the question, who controls the banks? Does Bill Gates control the banks or Murdoch?
Can I just ask one more question?
Very quickly, yeah.
Do you still believe you're the son of God?
Are we going to get into this?
Well, why don't we just get rid of it now? Because it was bound to come up, wasn't it? It was inevitable to come up. You said you were Jesus. Well, you were quoted as saying that in the press, that you were Jesus, and while you run around in a turquoise suit and everybody said he's mad. What was that all about?
Well, that's kind of funny, because The Biggest Secret has 2 chapters strongly questioning from historical research whether Jesus actually existed. I don't believe that for a second.
Okay.
Myself.
Just clear that one up, though, because it's bound to come up. It's going to come up.
If you go back to what you were talking about with the previous guest.
Yeah, with Richard, yeah.
The way that I perceive things, and increasingly more and more people are perceiving things, is that what we call creation, everything that exists, is actually the same energy expressing itself in different ways. And energy is consciousness. Right. And as even conventional science accepts that energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed into another form, that means consciousness is indestructible. Right. Which is immediately quite a pointer to the fact that our consciousness lives forever. And if you take this infinite energy field, this infinite consciousness, and you call it God, call it Ethel if you like, it doesn't matter to me, and we are an expression of this energy, we are part of it, like a droplet of water in an ocean of consciousness, then symbolically we're all sons of God. We're all aspects of the whole.
So you said you were a son of God, not the son of God.
What I was trying to point out is that we are aspects of the whole, and indeed in the end we are the whole. You see, if you look at a droplet of water in an ocean, those droplets are connected to the rest of the ocean.
Sure.
Therefore, they are the ocean as well as their individual self. And for me, we are everything that exists as well as being what we perceive to be just a part of it.
I remember you also saying to me, though, on a previous occasion that it was a great way of getting a load of publicity at the time.
Well, I didn't actually put it in that way. I'm
but I mean,
sure,
it was a way of getting yourself kind of known, maybe not in the way you ultimately wanted to be, but...
Every experience is there for not just one reason, but many reasons.
Sure.
And when, for instance, this biggest secret comes out and people see what's in it, I'm going to be hit by a tidal wave of ridicule and condemnation, which will make the early 90s in Glen Hoddle seem like a birthday party.
Okay.
Now, because of what I experienced in the early 1990s, that ain't a problem for me. If I was about to experience it for the first time, then I would be in a very different situation now. So even though back at that time it seemed a very negative thing, and it certainly was, it was a nightmare to experience, when I look back, not only did it set me free of what other people thought of me, which as I mentioned earlier, it also allowed me to experience such an onslaught and to learn very much more how to cope with it. And that next onslaught is about to come. And because of the early 90s,
You'll
I'm
be
ready
prepared.
for it. Absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, you know, we just, you know, life's forever. We just experience, we learn if we're sensible, and we move on.
All right. 0500 1053 89 if you want to talk to David Icke. Good question from Greg in London. Greg, hi, you're on Talk Radio. What did you want to say?
Hello. Very good evening to both of you.
Hello, Greg.
It's a great honour to speak to you, David. I've seen you before, and I'm going to see you tomorrow, so hope it's a good show.
Monday night, Conway Hall, yeah.
Monday night,
Actually,
sorry.
Dave's,
Monday night,
we'll
yeah.
mention this later if you want to grab a pen. David, you're going to do a talk, aren't you, in London, Birmingham and Manchester. We'll give you the details of those a bit later on in the show, so stand by for that. But, Greg, go on, carry on.
Yeah,
What did you want to ask?
Very pleased that these issues are being discussed on a national radio station.
Okay.
My question is to do with the European Union. I have done quite a lot of research on the European Union.
Right.
And the Soviet Union as well, and I'm absolutely convinced that the European Union is a more perfected form of the Soviet Union. It has the advantage of technology which the Soviet Union did not have. Cameras are going up everywhere. Microchips can be planted into people nowadays, and people can be monitored that way. That's being experimented now on prisoners, actually. That's part of the experiment.
What was the question you wanted to know about the
Well, the question is, where does the European Union fit into your schema as a highly centralized, really a tyranny in the making?
Okay. We've got to be fairly brief on this, so we've got to go to a break. But
well, maybe we could continue this a bit afterwards, because this is fundamental.
All right.
One of the things I've been talking about in my books for years is the European Union's part in all this. The structure this agenda has been heading for some considerable time, and the millennium years we're heading through now is a time that's long been identified as the time when this structure is designed to be fully introduced, is to have a world government which would make all the major decisions in the world. It would control a world central bank, which would control a world currency, which in the end would not be cash at all, and there's very little cash in circulation now compared with electronic money. It would be an electronic currency for which there are fundamental implications for freedom. The world government would also control a world army, which I've been writing about again in my books for years, is designed to be NATO, expanding into more and more countries to become the fully fledged world army. And of course things like Bosnia have moved on the status quo and the position of NATO very, very much. Also, under the world government would come a microchip population, which is, Greg quite rightly points out, is no longer some nutty theory, which people were dismissing it as years ago. It's actually now being suggested, and in some cases around the world, introduced. Now, under this edifice of global power is designed to be three super state unions. The first one, which is the most advanced, is the European Union, which, if you remember, was evolved out of a free trade area, the European Economic Community.
Right.
The other one is designed to be the American Union, evolved out of a free trade area, which they have now over there, called the North American Free Trade Agreement. And in 1994, another free trade area called APEC, Asia Economic cooperation was set up for the Asia-Australia area of the world. And the idea is that these superstates are the next level down. And then comes under that, in this edifice of power, the nation-states, which are basically the equivalent to the world government of county councils.
All right, I'll have to stop you there for a second.
Okay.
It's separate. We'll come back to this in a moment. It's the Dave Barrett Friday. David Icke is my guest. You're listening.
This is Talk Radio. Across the UK on 1053 and 1089 AM medium wave.
By the way, I have a sneaking little suspicion that was the wrong promo. I think that David Bowie thing was actually last week or the week before, wasn't it? So ignore that, David. I think David Bowie is on tomorrow after all.
It's a reincarnation.
It's a reincarnation, obviously. 11:44 on the Dave Barrett Friday. David Icke is my guest. So much to talk about. You just wanted to finish what you were saying there, just briefly, about these different groups.
Yeah, and again, when you look behind the history of the European Union, there's an organisation keeps coming up again and again, our old friend, the Bilderberg Group.
Right.
The key person who, more than anyone else in this country, has played a major part in, first of all, taking us into the European community and pressing to this day for more and more centralisation of power, is Ted Heath.
Right.
Bilderberg Group.
Who is? I still am shocked. Who is the Bilderberg Group? Do we know who they are?
Yeah, well,
simply because I still don't quite understand who they are or what their importance is.
Right. The Bilderberg Group were created officially anyway at a meeting in Oosterbeek, Holland, in May 1954. The chairman at that time was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, Prince Voterspeek mate.
Right.
After he was chucked out in a way, or had to be, and I think it was 76 because of the Lockheed scandal.
Right.
A number of people took over, including Sir Alec Douglas Hume, Lord Home,
right,
who he became chairman. Lord Carrington's the present chairman, and of course Lord Home sat next to Ted Heath when Ted Heath signed us into the European community.
Right. What is it? What's its purpose, though?
Its purpose, like I said earlier, like all this network of organisations, is a coordinating body,
right,
between apparently unconnected political parties, unconnected countries, unconnected banks, unconnected...
So it's part of the manipulation.
Yeah, big time.
All right.
And we have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who are Bilderberg attendees.
Right.
We have...
Does that mean that, are you suggesting that our current Prime Minister has bought into this? Or is he unwittingly bought into it? Or does he know that he's bought into it, or what?
Tony Blair has been put in there. This is why Murdoch, of all people, suddenly wants a Labour Prime Minister. What a surprise. Where did that come from? Did I come in late or what?
So we have no democracy, is what you're saying?
We live in a one-party state, just like America does. It's more obvious in America.
Right.
For instance, Bill Clinton and George Bush, they're not opponents, they're associates. I mean, if people read The Biggest Secret, they'll see that stuff. But the point about Tony Blair, he's been put in there to make sure that we go into the single bank and into the single currency. And that's the way we're heading. Never mind all this stuff about, we'll have a referendum. They had a referendum about whether we stayed in. Millions and millions of pounds were poured into the campaign to tell people to vote yes, stay in. And a fraction of that was left for the people saying the opposite. Let's pull out. And so we're looking now at a Labour government that I think is a classic expression and final confirmation to anyone that wants to look that we live in a one-party state. Because what happens is that when a party's in opposition, it opposes, at least verbally. When it's in power, it does exactly the same as the other side did. And we've had a wonderful little example of that today. Do you remember when they were talking about genetically manipulated food while the Conservative Party were in power, and they were talking about the food that we eat and what's in it and stuff, how Jack Cunningham and people like that were banging their fist and saying, we must have stricter controls, we must have this, we must have that. Today, Jack Cunningham is now a minister. He, in government, he's saying today that we shouldn't worry about genetically manipulated food, it's perfectly safe, and now the opposition Conservative Party are calling for a 3-year moratorium. They weren't calling for it in government.
Why have they? But if they were part, that doesn't make sense in a sense. Because if they were part of the group that was trying to get genetic food in, why have they suddenly changed sides?
The thing is that, I mean, I'm just giving that as an example of,
generally speaking,
I'm just giving that as an example of how no matter what people say in opposition, the same agenda unfolds when in power.
Okay.
Now, but it's an interesting point you make. You see, I go back to what I said at the start of this chat, that you can only control people en masse by manipulating the way they think and the way they feel and the way they perceive themselves in the world. If we knew we lived in a one-party state, and the Americans knew, that there would be hell to pay, wouldn't they? If you're going to,
but don't we all know that? In one sense, we all believe that anyway, because we don't believe.
We all believe it. I'm not sure we all believe it from my experience. But the point is that if I said to one of the producers outside before we came in, if I put you in a cage in prison, you would know you were in prison, and you would therefore do everything possible within your power to get out of it.
Right.
What if I put you in a prison and you didn't know you were in one? You'd do nothing to get out of it, would you? And this is the idea. We have to have this illusion of opposition and democracy and choice, because then we won't rebel against the fact that we don't have it. And so, again, in America, where I must say people are far more open to this stuff, and I've spent a lot of time there recently, they're increasingly understanding that no matter which president or which party is in power in Congress, the same agenda unfolds. And everywhere you go, you see the same thing.
I want to get through some more calls. I also want to ask you in a moment why, as a population, we are so apathetic to all of this and we don't fight back. Then if we are being controlled, so why do we just allow it to roll over us like a wave? Terry's in Southampton. Terry, hi, welcome to Talk Radio. What did you want to say?
Yeah, hello there.
Hi.
Hello, David.
Hello, Terry.
I want to ask you, what do you think a man should do to be happy and content in his life?
Well, I mean, that's up to every individual. What I would say, from my point of view, what's made me far happier and far more contented is since the early 1990s particularly, is expressing what I am rather than what I thought other people thought I should be. Because when I stepped out of that prison, for the first time I realized, going back to what I was just saying, I realized I'd actually been in one. I spent most of my life up to that point thinking I was free and thinking that I was me, and then after that kind of, if you like, massive experience in the early 1990s, when I stepped out of the fear of what other people thought of me and all this stuff, I then realized the massive mental and emotional prison that I'd lived in up to that point without realizing it. And for me, if we're going to bring this edifice of manipulation down, and we are, because this is the time that we're living through now, it's a wonderful time to be alive. We're going to see this stuff fall and true freedom come to this planet for the first time in a long time in the next 15 years or so. I feel we need to do three things, in my view. First of all, we can look for solutions to things, or we can do what I think is far more effective, and that's removing the cause of the problem. And three things I think would make such a difference to our lives and to the ability of the few to manipulate from the center. One, we step out of the fear of what other people think of us. Right. At which point we cease to be the sheep and we start to express our own uniqueness and our own view. Two, we allow everyone else to express their uniqueness and their individuality without their fear of being ridiculed or condemned for the crime of being different. At that point, we cease to be the sheepdog of the sheep. And thirdly, the balance point, no one imposes what they believe on anyone else, so always respecting free will. So, you have every right to express your individuality. So do I. As long as mine doesn't impose itself on yours. That's the balance point where we respect each other. Now, if we can do those three things, the herd breaks up. The policing of the herd breaks up. And we start to celebrate the incredible diversity of contribution that we all have to make to the world, instead of thinking we have to conform to some uniformity. And to step out of it is something that we fear. Okay, we go to Colin.
I think David Icke is missing something here.
Okay.
He's coming from a viewpoint of this mystical wholeness. He says that he's a researcher and he's sort of neutral, but really he's got this utopian view of freedom. And I think that reality tells us, history tells us, that the sheep, the mass of people, the herd, to use Nietzsche's term, slave morals and master morals, or Plato's idea of the guardians who are born to rule. History tells us that always in human societies, those who are born to rule or have the ability to lead will lead those bloodlines you're talking about, and the mass will always be cowed to follow, and you can't expect the mass to become leaders. You know, I mean, really, you're sort of making a big fuss about something that really is just as it is and always will be, and I think you're demonising organisations. You complain about being demonised yourself, but you're demonising the Bilderbergers. I mean, some people may think that the Bilderbergers are actually doing something good for humanity. They're taking humanity towards a more ordered system.
So you've, so in a sense, Colin, it sounds like you've actually bought into exactly what David is saying in an opposite way.
Not at all. I just...
Are you happy to be led and to be a sheep?
No, but I look at the reality of the situation, and I think there's only a few people that can be unique. That's why we have great artists and great writers. I don't think you can look at the shop floor of a factory and say every one of those people can be a Plato.
That's quite a frightening. That's a quite terrifying view.
So sad.
But an anarchy. If your world came into being, which it won't, it will be anarchy. You know, everybody out there speaking their own private language, not communicating with anybody else. Man is a social animal, and the body politic.
But Colin, I can't believe that you're saying it's okay to be a sheep and not.
I'm not saying it's okay.
You're just saying it's the way it is, and we should accept it.
It's the way it is. But I'm saying that there's great beauty in great civilizations, great tyrannies.
All right, David. What do you make of that?
Well, it's not very often I'm friggin' speechless, but I'm almost at that point.
Okay.
This is the very mentality, I have to say, that allows a few to control the world. The reason that the situation has been the few controlling the mass through this period of known human history, if people get to read The Biggest Secret, which starts thousands of years ago, and it starts thousands of years ago for a very good reason. These interbreeding bloodlines have been playing the same game and the same manipulative methods right the way from the start. And there is a reason why this thing has gone all the way through history. Constantly, people have been pressured and manipulated into denying their own uniqueness, denying their own individuality, and pressuring other people around them to do the same. This is the constant through this period. This is why we've had the few leading the mass ever since. And until we break this idea that there's only a few people who are unique. Oh, beam me up, Scotty, for goodness sake. Colin, this is going to go on, for goodness sake.
Are we not all unique, Colin, in our own way?
Well, we are in our own way, yes. But I mean, I think that David Icke is showing what Nietzsche called the resentment of the slave morals. You know, where you say,
what's the slave moral?
Well, you know, the slave moral is the slave is, or the mass is jealous of the excellent people. Aristocracy means rule the best, and you have to accept that in life there are people who are very good at leading, just as there are people who are very good at painting, and that those that are good at leading...
Hang on a minute, isn't there a difference between leading and controlling?
Exactly.
Well, controlling is the word that David likes to use. I would say government means steering. Kuba from Greek, it means to steer, and the ship of state must be steered by those that are best at doing it. And if you have this...
Do you think Tony Blair and John Major are the best at doing it? And do you think for one moment, Colin, that they're actually in control of this country?
I don't think in control. They're part helmsman. But I mean, Tony Blair is an excellent media manipulator. I mean, the man is staggering. He's like Clinton. He can go on TV and make everybody believe him, and that's what we need. If we had the mass...
I can't believe what you're saying, Colin. Even if he's making us believe things that aren't true.
Yeah, Plato called it the noble lie.
Well, Plato can call it anything he likes, but it's still control at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, he's one of the greatest brains that we've ever had, and I would...
Did you ever meet Plato?
No, but his Republic is a far better view of what humanity should be.
You look at the way that Africa, which could feed itself many, many times over if left to its own devices, and that land was used to feed empty bellies instead of being taken over by Western transnational corporations to grow cash crops for the Western industry or the Western market. You would see that what happens in African countries and other areas of the world where people are hungry in land of plenty, that we have flipping anarchy now. And I'm not saying, and again, you know, people just take on this idea you're talking black and white all the time. I'm not saying we're not going to have structure, we're not going to have order, but you made the key point there, Dave. We need leaders who serve, not leaders who control.
Right.
That's the difference.
Let me start. Harborough. David, hi, you got a question?
Hi, David.
Hi.
I must admit, I just turned on Talk Radio about half an hour ago, and I was absolutely gobsmacked, because I've now been following the Bilderberg story for about 20 years now.
Right.
To actually see it on the air, as again something you have to find out about in underground books, which you're not allowed to buy in normal bookshops. It's a pleasant change.
Good.
My question is regarding Kosovo, because as I see it, Kosovo is now being used as a proving ground for a future world police force. You know, you two guys will come to an agreement, we'll lock you in a hotel, and if you don't like it, we'll blitz you in a week's time. I mean, do you think this is what they're doing down there?
I think that is an extension of the whole Bosnian conflict, David, and it falls into a mind manipulation technique, a mass mind manipulation technique that I call in my books problem, reaction, solution. And this is actually the most effective, the most powerful, and the most used technique of manipulating what we call public opinion, the mass consciousness. And it works like this. You have something you want to introduce. It might be more and more power to the police, more armed police force. It might be certain legislation that is very controlling and very centralizing. You might want to introduce legislation of various kinds, which, if you did it openly, you know you were going to get a massive reaction against it. So to manipulate that legislation or that policy into position, you have to manipulate people not only not to oppose what you want, but to demand you do it. And you do it in this way, and you'll see this on the news every single day. You first of all create a problem. It could be a terrorist bomb, it could be a run on a currency, it could be a government collapse, it could be a rising crime. You then highlight that problem through the media to elicit a public reaction to it of something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? And at that point, those who covertly created the problem glean that public reaction, do something, openly offer their solutions to the problems they'd created. So if you want to centralize power in the world more and more, then as we've seen, wars can be a wonderful method of bringing this about. After the First World War, which as I show particularly in a book called And the Truth Shall Set You Free, and many other people have too, was manipulated by people manipulating and funding all sides. After that First World War, power in the world was in far fewer hands, and the whole of Europe was redrawn. After the Second World War, power was in even fewer hands, and we had the justification of the United Nations, the European community, and all these centralizing bodies, which have emerged ever since. So problem, reaction, solution is a wonderful way. And of course in Bosnia, as an example, we had the problem. The UN peacekeeping force was exposed as ineffective. At the same time, we were getting horrific pictures of what was happening in Bosnia. And what was the public and political outcry around the world? This can't go on, something must be done. Solution? 60,000 strong NATO world army. And this is going on all the time, problem, reaction, solution.
0500 1053 89 if you want to call us. If you want to fax us with a question, 0541 59 69 79. David, thank you for your call. Andrew's in the world. Andrew, good question. What is it? Where's he gone? I've lost him. There he is. Andrew, hi. You're on Talk Radio. What's your question?
Yeah, pleasure to speak to you, David.
Hello, Andrew.
Where's it all going, this manipulation? It's a very fascinating subject, and to be honest with you, I can see an awful lot of truth in it without reading your book.
That's the fascinating thing about it, isn't it, Andrew, actually, that there are bits of this that you think, hey, that just could be true. That just makes sense.
What's the end point?
What is the end point? It's a good question.
The end point is a situation where there is the total global control of the population, not just through great centralization of power on a military, economic, and political level, but also through a microchip population. And I'll tell you a quick story. I've spent a lot of time in America recently because I'm getting a lot of invites over there to talk about this stuff, where they're increasingly opening their minds to it.
Right.
And through a third party, I was asked to meet a guy who was a scientist, an expert in magnetics, who has worked for the CIA for many, many, many years. And like most people, because, you see, the way these organizations work is they are compartmentalized pyramids, just like banks are and businesses are and political parties, etc. are. The vast majority of the people in these pyramids, they're just going to work, they're earning their money to look after their families, and they don't know how the different elements within the pyramid, all their different contributions, fit together into a certain pattern. The only people that know that are the few at the top who were manipulating the pyramid.
Before,
Yeah, so this guy joined the CIA because he thought he was serving his country. And then he started to realize that his brilliance in magnetics and technology, which, as he said, is the technology that can create abundant growth in deserts without rain, that can give us free energy without utility bills and without the pollution and the fossil fuels, and that can cure things like cancer. That technology and that knowledge that he's created and developed, as other people have too, was not the way the CIA were using his knowledge. They were using it in the reverse negative way to control and to create weapons of destruction that can kill people without harming property. He called me to have this meeting because he wanted to pass on what was happening, and of course he couldn't. And interestingly, I asked him the obvious question, this guy, little guy, wonderful guy, and desperate to do something, but doesn't know what. I asked him the obvious question. I said, well, why do you do it, mate? You know, why do you do it? And he opened his shirt, and on his chest was this little see-through sachet, which they call a patch, apparently, in the trade. And in this patch was this gold liquid drug. And he said what had happened is when he started to kick up a big fuss about the way his work was being used and what he was being asked to do, he said he had this day where he left home and then had serious missing time. He knows nothing about what happened in this period, except he remembers waking up at some point on a kind of a medical couch in this room, and as he came round and realized where he was, he noticed this thing was on his chest. And what they've done, and he's not alone in this, they've manipulated his body to need this drug to survive. And this patch has to be replaced every 72 hours or he starts to die. And on one occasion, when they used his technology in an horrendous way in Ethiopia during the famine, he refused to work for them anymore, and they took the patch away and he started to die, and then they put it back when he came back to the line.
That's true. That's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
It is. Well, this is what's going on behind the movie screen that we're told is reality, that the guy earlier was talking about reality. Well, it's his reality. It's not my reality.
But
I'll just finish this point very quickly, Andrew, because it answers the point that you were talking about. The thing this guy said to me, he said, look, tell people if they say no to one thing and one thing alone, say no to the microchip. He said because they don't realize that although it's going to be sold to people as, oh, you'll never lose your child again, or hey, you'll never get mugged for your credit cards anymore or your money because we'll have it all on a microchip, people won't realize that technology is actually giving external control of your thinking and emotional processes to an outside source. That's the point of the microchip. The point
eventually will be that we will all have a microchip in us.
And it's being suggested, Dave, now. Right. It's being brought in.
Okay.
And one of the stepping stones to this is the cashless society, which we're hurtling towards.
Sure.
And just give you an example of
very quickly,
very quick, of the cashless society and why this is coming in. Okay, you go today into a shop or a garage or whatever, and you buy something. You hand over electronic money, a credit card, right? Mm-hmm. They run it through the machine and they say, oh, sorry, won't accept your card. You might be a bit surprised if you paid the bill or whatever, but you still at this moment still have an alternative to purchase. You say, well, better pay cash then.
Right.
What happens when there's no cash? Mm-hmm. And that machine says no to your credit card or eventually your microchip. How are you going to purchase?
You're completely controlled in that sense, aren't you?
And that's the idea.
Right.
And that's the idea of going to the cashless society. And I saw some figures when I was in America recently, of the amount of cash in circulation there in the banking system compared with electronic money.
Right.
And it would stagger people to see the minute fraction of what we call money that actually exists as cash. So to answer the question, in summary,
right.
That's where we're heading.
How that, in a sense, is a way of controlling mass populations. But there's more to it than just that, isn't there?
Oh, well, I mean, we're now hit on the real epicenter of the way people are controlled in the modern world. In fact, just in the modern world. There's two things. These bloodlines I talk about, when you chart them through history, there's two key things that keep coming up again and again. One is ritual sacrifice and human sacrifice, staggeringly, including today. I don't kid you.
Right.
The biggest secret, and my goodness me, the stuff in there about that, and some of the most famous people in the world involved in it. But the other thing is a scam in which you create an economic system in which you lend people money that doesn't exist, and then you charge them interest on it. Now, this is happening on a global scale today, but it's happened in many societies as these bloodlines have expanded their power through history until they've created a global situation. And it works like this. When you go into a bank and you ask for a loan, the bank does not print a single piece of paper or mint a single coin or move a single piece of precious metal a single solid inch. All it does is type into your account whatever they've loaned you. They are creating money out of fresh air. Mm-hmm. Now, in return for them lending you this fresh air, you have to sign over your wealth that does exist, your house, your business, right? And if you don't pay back wealth that doesn't exist or money that doesn't exist, they get your wealth that does exist because they get your collateral.
Right.
Now, this not just only means that the debt on a national, individual and business level is actually debt on money that doesn't exist and has never existed. It also gives the private banking cartel, which in the end at the peak of the pyramid is controlled by the same people, complete control over whether we have a boom, prosperity, jobs, etc., or a bust, a depression. Because people think, because we're led to believe this, that governments put money into circulation. Nonsense. The vast overwhelming majority of what we call money, purchasing power, units of exchange, come into existence by private banks making loans. The more loans they make, the more units of exchange come into circulation. Mm-hmm. When you do that, the more money in circulation, or units of exchange anyway, figures on a screen, the more people have to spend, the more they spend, the more companies have to make because people have increased demand, the more jobs you have, etc. Now, what overwhelmingly happens in a boom is people tend to get into more and more debt because they think, hey, this is great, things are going well, we'll have 2 holidays this year, or we'll have a bigger house or a bigger car. They're confident. Now, the people who created that boom were banks who increased the amount of money in circulation by making loans. Now, and this has happened throughout history. It's called the economic cycle. Nonsense. It's a total scam. At the optimum point, the banks then start taking money out of circulation. They push interest rates up, which suppress the demand for loans. Not only that, the people that have taken out loans at lower interest during the boom are now facing higher interest rates. What's happening is more and more money is being taken out of circulation back to the banks. There's far more less money in circulation. People have less money to spend. There's less demand. Companies don't need to make so much. We're now in a depression. And
who's benefiting? But the people behind the banks are benefiting from that because they get all the money back in.
Yeah, well, what they're benefiting for overwhelmingly is this. During a depression, funnily enough, staggeringly as it may seem, people don't go hungry during a depression because they don't want to eat. They don't lose their homes during a depression because they don't want to have a roof over their heads. There's simply not enough units of exchange in circulation to pay for it. And that's the only difference between a boom and a bust, the amount of money in circulation. Who controls that? The private banks. So what happens then? as the money's taken out of circulation, people can't pay their loans back, they go bankrupt, and who gets their wealth that does exist, their businesses, their homes, etc.? The people who played the scam by taking money out of circulation, creating the depression, and they've done it with fresh air figures on a screen. Now, this so-called economic cycle, which smart-suited economic correspondents on the BBC keep telling us is a natural cycle and is total manipulation, has been going on for centuries. And in this way, the real wealth of the world has been sucked out of the population into the hands increasingly of fewer and fewer people, and it's still going on.
That's pretty terrifying, isn't it, really? If you buy into that, and what you said, it kind of makes sense. I'm not an expert on money. Maybe if someone is, they'll ring us and disagree with you. 0500 1053 89. Princess Diana, we'll talk about it in a second, but I want to get through a few calls. Marlene is in... I'm going to go to Sally in London first, who's got a good question. Sally, hi, you're on Talk Radio. What's your question?
Hi, David.
Hi, Sally.
Hi, I've got a question about the Bilderbergers, going back to that.
Right.
Basically, it seems a very male-orientated thing. Are there or have there been any female Bilderbergers? And particularly, was Margaret Thatcher a Bilderberger? And if not, is that why she was deposed?
Certainly it is male-dominated. This whole structure's male-dominated, but it's not exclusively male. There are many women involved as well. Margaret Thatcher was certainly a Bilderberg attendee. She started attending Bilderberg meetings in the mid-70s. And, of course, what we saw with Margaret Thatcher, who was brought to power by this network, and she was just a pawn. I mean, at the level of prime ministers and presidents, I mean, they're just puppets, but they are puppets that are put there to do a particular job. And it's no coincidence. Let's just look here at both sides of the Atlantic. And then look at the Tony Blair situation, because it's a mirror here. They wanted Margaret Thatcher in. What happened during the 70s? We had the winter of discontent. We had massive undermining of this country, massive undermining of the Labour government under James Callaghan, etc. in the late 70s. And, I mean, a monkey could have come to power with a blue rosette, virtually, in 1979. Margaret Thatcher did. 1 year later, on the other side of the Atlantic, Uncle Ron came to power. And he just happened to come to power with exactly the same economic policies as Margaret Thatcher. One was Thatcherism, one was Reaganomics, same policies. Mm-hmm. Now, Margaret Thatcher was in there for the 80s, like Ronald Reagan, to bring in a certain economic system, a certain economic series of policies called Thatcherism. And what that did, basically, was give massive amounts of state ownership, just as one example, to the private cartels. Mm-hmm. Now, these people are puppets, and they're used for as long as they're useful, and then they're removed. Now,
Do you think that's what happened with Thatcher, then?
Well, one of the things that happened with Margaret Thatcher, of course, is that she was bleating on about centralization of power in Europe. Now, this is absolute fact and totally provable. There was a Bilderberg meeting in 1989 in an island off Spain, in May 1989. And in that same month, a newspaper in Washington called The Spotlight, whose politics I don't share for a second, but they do some good research into the Bilderbergers. They ran a story that their information was that the Bilderbergers had decided, I'm not talking about the Bilderbergers as a whole, I'm talking about the inner core elite, had decided that Thatcher had to go and that she was going to go before the next election. Now, that was actually printed in May 1989, and that's when the undermining started, if you follow it back, and eventually she was out. And ironically and symbolically, she found it in effect that she was out when she got the result of the first ballot while she was attending a heads of government meeting for the European Union.
Claims in this book. Are you not going to get sued to high heaven by all the people you make these claims about?
Well, if people look at my previous books, particularly one called And the Truth Shall Set You Free, which is like the companion book to The Biggest Secret, there's a tremendous number of people mentioned in there involved in all this stuff.
Right.
And I'm still waiting for...
You've not been sued?
A writ. Absolutely not.
Do you think you'll get a writ from this book?
Now, this is a different kettle of place and haddock, Dave, because the stuff that's in this book, naming some of the most famous people in the world, in this country, in America, involved in some stuff that would just simply take your breath away. I can't see how there's any way that they could ignore this to the point where they wouldn't go down the legal route. And they should do that if they want to make my day, because then we can then have the witnesses in the box and we can get this whole thing out into the open.
Aren't they just going to, if what you say is true, and if what you say in this book is true, are they not just going to kill you?
Well,
seriously, are you worried that you will get killed?
Well, there are people who have passed information to me in America who are not in the public arena at all, who are no longer with us over the years. But you see, when you go back to where I'm coming from spiritually, for want of a word, that my consciousness lives forever, and we're on an eternal journey of evolution through experience. Well, so I leave this physical body. Crikey, my knees are knocking.
Right.
I just decided in this life that I'm going to go for this. And I'm going to put out as much information as possible, and I'm going to keep running this situation. And whatever happens to me happens. I mean, it's just, it's a really, Dave, to be honest, it's of no consequence what happens to me.
Yeah, but
what the consequence is, bringing an end to this horrific
that's
stuff.
Exactly the point I was going to make, though. If there is this huge conspiracy going on in the world, you are one person against something that's been here for, you say in the book, thousands of years. One man against this whole lot. How can you possibly win?
Well, first of all, I don't see it as a battle. I think once you get into fighting, you become part of the problem. It's not me that's going to change the world. It is information. If we go back again to what
let's go, because we've got so much to fit in here, and let's go on to the Princess Diana thing now, because this is in the book. You say that Princess Diana was murdered, and you say you've got documented evidence to prove that.
Well, what I do in a chapter of 56 pages is put out a tremendous amount of information, which massively points to the fact that she was murdered, not just murdered, but ritually murdered. The problem you have in a program like this, as you understand, is that the chapter I'm talking about is called The Goddess and the King, and it's chapter 18, I think, and you have to read the previous 17 to see the significance of chapter 18, because there's just so much to know.
Right.
But basically, what I show in there is that the royal family were definitely involved in the whole thing, that they actually were behind the murder of a guy called Barry Manicky, who was a detective who worked with Diana, and Diana was having a relationship with, and he was taken out. And this guy, James Hewitt, actually was quoted in the Times newspaper, never mind my book, earlier last year, actually saying that he'd been warned, because of course Hewitt had a relationship with Diana, that he was warned by a member of the royal family to quit the relationship or else, and also it was pointed out to him that what happened to Barry Manicky would happen to him. Now, we're talking about people being murdered here with the knowledge of the British royal family. And if what I've said in the book, and there's stuff that I really can't talk about here because you've got a license to keep, then come on, Queen of England, come on, Prince Charles, come on, Prince Philip, let's have you, let's see you writ, let's get in court, and let's sort this out at last, because it's about time the people of this country knew what some of the people that they kind of, so many people bow down to, are actually involved in, and it's absolutely horrific, and the Windsors are up to their neck in it.
All right, putting to one side who killed Princess Diana, because obviously, as you said, there are certain legal implications of suggesting exactly who it was. Why do you think she was murdered?
Well, again, go back to the 17 chapters that precede this one. There's so much to know before what is in that 18th chapter makes sense and can be supported, and people can see, wow, I can see that now.
Right.
But basically, she was ritually murdered. I can talk about that side of it without risking your license.
Okay.
Again, you go back to bloodlines. you can pick up a, this is one example, this is one aspect of it. You can pick up a group of people who were certainly part of this bloodline network in what we call Turkey, ancient Troy, called, they eventually became known as the Sicambrian Franks. This is from where we get the name France from.
Right.
They eventually, these Sicambrian Franks, became known as the Merovingians, the royal offshoot of this tribe. And it was the Franks stroke Merovingians who actually created the city called Paris, and they named it after a guy who was one of the guys involved in the Trojan Wars, because they knew that they came from ancient Troy. These Franks Merovingians worshipped one of the great ancient goddesses of the ancient world called Diana, the goddess Diana. I mean, you look at the goddess Diana in the ancient world, she was massively worshipped, and she was a symbol of the moon.
Right.
The Merovingians, created underground places to worship and sacrifice to the goddess Diana, including human sacrifice, outside the original Paris. And where that underground sacrificial chamber was to the goddess Diana is now called the Pont d'Alma Tunnel, where the car crashed. And actually Pont d'Alma actually means passage or bridge of the moon goddess. Now, one of the satanic deities that they worship and do their rituals to, because we're into some seriously bizarre stuff here in terms of the rituals these people get involved in.
Right.
And their symbolism and their ritual is colossal. They're obsessed with it. It's a good way of reading them. One of them is called Hecate. And Hecate, her day of sacrifice is August the 31st, which just happens to be the time that Diana died in that tunnel. And when you go through the book, and I
just seem an awful lot of coincidences here, don't they? Do you know what I mean?
Well, Dave, what I'm giving you here
Right.
is just a fraction, just little tidbits of what's actually in the book. When you see all this put together, it blows your bloomin' mind, the ritual. And I'll give you another example of what I mean. They're obsessed with symbols, and one of the key symbols is their signature, which initiates understand, but of course the mass of the population just see it as a symbol because they're not in on the knowledge, is the lighted torch. And this goes back to an ancient theme of which many different deities and many different names have been given to the heroes of this theme, but the one that's most used is a guy called Prometheus, and this is the theme and the legend of someone who took fire, knowledge in other words, from the gods and gave it to humans, in a few humans it turns out. And so the symbol of illumination, the Illuminati, is the symbol of the lighted torch or the flame. Now that's what the Statue of Liberty is in New York Harbor. That was given to New York Harbor by French Freemasons who were in on this knowledge. And people in America think that says this is the land of the free. What that says in symbolic terms is we control the place, we control the country here, and we're showing you, and you can't even see it. So when they killed Kennedy, for instance, in Dealey Plaza in 1963, which again I talk about in the book, that was another ritual killing according to their sick ritual. Afterwards, the local Freemason group, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, they put up an obelisk, which is an ancient Egyptian symbol and very much a Freemasonic symbol. It's the penis of Osiris in Egyptian legend. And the penis of Osiris links into bloodlines and all that stuff as well. They put up an obelisk in Dealey Plaza next to where not only did they kill Kennedy, but they killed Lee Harvey Oswald within a few yards of each other. They put the lighted torch on the top. What did they put on Kennedy's grave? The lighted torch to this day. What is the symbol that has become the shrine to Diana on top of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel? It is a massive symbol, indeed a replica of the flame held by the Statue of Liberty standing on a black pentagram, and you can't get more symbolic than that. And a lot of people don't realize there's a mirror image of the Statue of Liberty on an island in the Seine just down from where Diana died. And so when you start to look at the symbol of the lighted torch, You see it all over the place in so many areas that are relevant to this brotherhood, because it is the Illuminati, it's the illumination.
That's all pretty terrifying stuff, it has to be said.
But what's great, Dave, it's coming out.
Okay.
There's two things that have allowed this to go on. The fact that people haven't realised it's gone on, and two, public apathy. If we can change those two things, or we're changing one, we can change the other, this thing's going to come down. Because when you get to the peak of these pyramids, and the purest of these bloodlines from their vision of what pure is, you're talking about a very small number of people. If we can turn the spotlight on this network and this group and expose what's happening and increasingly who they are, then we can bring freedom back to this world, and that's what we're going to do.
All right, it's the Dave Barrett Friend from Talk Radio, 0500 1053 89. Let's get to some more calls now. Let's go to Marlene, who's in London, who's been holding on. Marlene, hi, welcome to Talk Radio. What did you want to ask?
Oh, hello, Daisy.
Hi.
Hello, Marlene.
We have it before. This dictatorship, because we are living in a dictatorship, you make it sound so easy. We've got to change things. I mean, there's so many things happening today. The suppression of alternative cancer cures, all in the medical field, etc. We're up against the most powerful forces. I mean, we are mere mortals. When I tell people these things, they look at me as if I'm a nutter.
I know.
You know, it's a lot to take on board for Mr. and Mrs. Joe Average. And a lot of them either don't want to know or they turn their backs on it, etc. What can we do? There must be some... It's all right saying pass this information on, but you give it to them.
Okay.
And they look at it as if you're off cloud cuckoo land.
Well, the point is, I mean, if we're going to make the change, then we have to allow people to see that there is no such thing as Mr. and Mrs. Average. This idea that we're an ordinary man and woman in the street and I'm just Joe Public and I'm just Mr. Average, what can I do? That's the very mentality that is constantly emphasized and we're constantly pressured to take on, so that we think we're powerless and we just walk away from it. And it's a simple situation, Marlene. Unless enough people wake up and start to act in a different way and start to communicate this information and start to focus on what's going on and start to look about how they can make a contribution to changing it, then this thing's going to go on. It's as simple as that. Okay. And what we're facing is a massive evolutionary experience, because in the end, this is what it is. Every experience is just an evolutionary experience. What humanity is now facing, and it's a wonderful time if we take the right decisions here, it's facing the consequences of giving your power away. Because the power that is used to control us is merely the power we give away every single day. If we take that power back and start to think for ourselves and allow other people to think for ourselves, even if crime of crimes they think something different to us, we start the process of making it more easy and a much more pleasant experience to communicate this information. And then it starts to go out. So much information that people need to hear, they don't hear because people are frightened of the reaction of putting it out.
Okay. Marlene, thank you for your question. Let's go to Maureen now, who's calling us from Wiltshire. Maureen, hi.
Hello.
You're on Talk Radio.
I've been listening to David Icke, and I agree with quite a lot of what he says. You know, from the time of the first tablet of stone, there's been an infrastructure of control. What does David Icke suggest other than infrastructure? Okay. There has to be an infrastructure for society to perform.
What I'm not saying, and I emphasize this, is we don't need organization. Of course we need organization. Of course we need a situation in which people make their different contributions to society, and we have an organized society in which life is not chaotic. And indeed, if you really look at the world today, we're looking at flipping chaos. I mean, we're in a situation today where someone makes a few decisions on the financial markets on Monday morning, and the lives of the planet are affected. I mean, how chaotic can you get than that? It's not organization that I'm challenging. I think we need more in many ways. What I'm challenging is that the structure is not there to organize and to serve and to make things possible. It is there to control and suppress. Okay. It's like everything. It's not knowledge that's good or bad or positive or negative. It's the use of that knowledge. It's not organization or structure that is good or bad. It's the use and the motivation of that structure. So organization is not something I'm challenging. It's top-down control and imposition, and that's a very different thing.
Okay, good question. Joe in Somerset. Joe, hi, you're on Talk Radio.
Yeah, hi. I'm just calling about the... So this is going back, but I have trouble with the word trilateral...
Trilateralists.
Yeah, okay.
Does that have anything to do with the Majestic 12 group, which you hear about when it comes to UFOs? UFO subject.
Yeah, for people who haven't come across that, there's a belief among many researchers in the UFO extraterrestrial area, if you like, of research, that there's an organization based in America called Majestic 12 or MJ12. Whether that exists or whether it doesn't, there's certainly, and I do go into this in The Biggest Secret, there's certainly an extraterrestrial connection here, for sure, when you go back far enough in the ancient world particularly, and there's endless references in ancient texts all over the world, in every culture, of the gods who had very, very advanced knowledge. And I think if you go far enough back, you see that there were two levels of knowledge in the ancient world. One was a small group of, quote, gods who produced the knowledge to create the fantastic structures of the ancient world, some of which would even struggle to build today, such as their geometrical perfection and scale. And then there was the people who weren't in receipt of that knowledge. And I feel that what's happened is that and I put the documentation in The Biggest Secret of this, that advanced knowledge in the ancient world was hijacked and taken into the mystery school and the later secret society network, and has been made available to the chosen few at the top of those pyramids and the top of those secret societies, and kept from the mass of the people. And the greatest position of control is if you hold significant knowledge and you keep the rest of the people in ignorance of it. So I think that what's happened over this period of time is that these particular bloodlines, this network I've been talking about, has had access to knowledge that was far more advanced than the general population has had. Okay. And that goes on to the present day. And therefore the perception of possibility technologically and in terms of mind control and many other areas that the mass of the population believe is possible is very much different to what is actually possible if they had receipt of the knowledge that the few at the top have. So I think that if you, never mind talking about today, I think if you go far enough back, then I think there is an extraterrestrial connection to this. Okay. And definitely is something that is going to open a lot of doors of understanding of what's been happening to this planet over a long time. All right. The Trilateralists are definitely involved with this network that I'm talking about. It's like a spider's web. It all connects with itself.
Okay. Dave Barrett, like pornography, drugs, there are other methods of doing that.
Big time. I mean, let's take the drugs.
Right.
What my research shows in the books, and indeed what other people have done also, is that the people who run the wars on drugs, particularly those in America, are the ones that are running them. George Bush, and I've said this throughout America for the last 2 years, my books are published in America, I'm still waiting for a writ, George, and I'd love one if you want to put it in the post. George Bush is one of the biggest drug runners in North America. He's one of the bloodline families. His father, Prescott Bush, was one of the guys who funded Hitler through the Harriman organization and a company called the UBC, which locked into one of Hitler's funders in Holland and Germany, because Wall Street and London actually funded Hitler through particularly the German subsidiaries of British and particularly American multinational corporations. And of course, if you look at what's happening today with the drugs, you're seeing a global version of what the British did, or what this network did, calling themselves British, when they wanted to take over China. They poured in the opium, they got the Chinese hooked on opium, that Chinese society broke down. It's coherent.
Didn't Chinese society have opium long before the Britons got it?
But we had the Opium Wars, where the British, particularly through a guy called Palmerston, Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, as we call it today, were forcing the Chinese, against their will at the time, to take opium. And it was actually part of the deal that brought an end to that we got Hong Kong, funnily enough, which became the drug money laundering center of the world, not least through something called the Hong Kong and Shanghai Corporation, set up by the British government, which became the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. So when you look at occupation by drug addiction, the Chinese was a wonderful example. What's happening now, if you want to break society down, you want to stop the young expressing their full potential, then put drugs into circulation. And the other great thing that drugs do...
You're not controlling people by that, are you? Because they're getting out of control.
But you're controlling them in the sense that they're not going to make a contribution to society in a way.
Don't you need them to do that, though? No. You need them in order to control them, in order to create more wealth for yourself. Because if they're not potentially going to give you any dosh, are they?
They are, because they're
going to steal the money for the drugs. But I mean,
they're buying the drugs, and you're providing the drugs. It's a wonderful way that a lot of this stuff, this control and manipulation, is covert stuff, is actually funded.
Right.
But you see. When someone is addicted to drugs, they're going to be no problem to you. And if you look at the situation I talked earlier, a problem, reaction, solution, then the drug situation is a wonderful problem in which people demand a solution. Something must be done, and then you offer a solution. For instance, when I was in America about 18 months ago, they had a poll in the Los Angeles Times, and 84% of those polled said that they would give up basic freedoms if they thought it would win the war on drugs.
Right.
So drugs and the whole problem of drugs is a wonderful way of creating wealth for the covert projects, for creating a problem reaction solution to put in more and more draconian laws to fight the war on drugs, and crucially, coming back to what you were mentioning a minute ago, it's very, very difficult to manipulate harmony.
Okay.
It is a piece of cake to manipulate chaos. And the Freemasons have a Latin motto, the higher levels of it do, ordo ab chaos, which in English means order out of chaos. Problem, reaction, solution. Create the chaos, then offer the order out of the chaos, your order.
Let me read you some faxes that have come in. One of them, I'm going to read you this one first. In a national newspaper poll a week after the death of Princess Diana, 93% of the British public expressed an opinion that she was murdered.
Yeah.
Mohammed El Fayed also suspects she and his son were murdered in suspicious circumstances. He asked, do you feel the Queen and the royal family involved in that? Well, we've talked about it, so I'm going to go back over that one. He also says, the outpouring of grief after her death was the nation's way of showing we suspect foul play, and we don't mean the paparazzi did it. Interesting. This is, after all that you've said, and you've been talking for 2 hours nearly now, this fax just came through, and I find this fax chilling, I have to tell you. It says to David Icke, doesn't say who it's from, it does say it's from, J. Jimson. He says, money is power, power controls, therefore those with money control. That's how it should be.
That's
chilling. I mean, I don't find that quite chilling.
I'm speechless again, but I'm not, because Dave,
why do people buy into it unless they've got lots of dosh, of course, and they're part of it? But how is it buy into that idea?
How is it possible, people ask, for a few to control the world? I tell you the sad thing. It's not even difficult.
Right.
Once you control the flow of information through the education system, or what we laughingly call it, you name me one thing in the education system, the basic curriculum in this country, that is outside the norm. Where is it?
Okay.
Children aren't young people aren't encouraged to challenge norms, but just to become sponges of it. And I've gone around universities, I have to say, and this is a sweeping generalization, and there are many teenage people who are thinking for themselves. But I tell you what I found chilling is going around universities and finding great tracks of people who are surely at that time of their lives they're going to rebel against something, who have bought the system lock, stock and flipping barrel. And they're the people in the positions of influence in the next generation. I find that chilling. But what I don't find chilling is the fact that more and more people in all the countries I go into are beginning to wake up. You said something off mic while there was a break earlier, Dave, which is absolutely spot on. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago on this radio, people would not be listening to this at all. They'd say, this guy is completely mad. Now, of course, there's people that still say that, but more and more people are waking up, and it's a wonderful time to be alive in the next 10 years, because we're going to see the structure come down. Okay. We're going to see the British royal family cease to be the British royal family, I promise you.
Right, we'll wait to see if that happens. Just a quick reminder here that if you want to see David, I know you're doing some talks, aren't you, about this whole thing called The Biggest Secret. And in London, in fact, on Monday, day after on Monday through there's the Conway Hall in Red Lion Square in Holborn. In Birmingham on Tuesday, the 16th of February, that's at Dudley Town Hall. And on Thursday, the 18th of February, in Manchester, at the Forum, which is in Wythenshawe. And if people ring those venues, they can get details about tickets and stuff if it's not already sold out.
They start at...
if it isn't, it certainly will be now, I suspect.
Well, a heck of a lot of tickets are gone, and this is an indication of the way that this awakening is happening, and people are starting to look at things they wouldn't look at before. And also, of course, when someone speaks out in the public arena, there's lots of people who people never hear of, who know this stuff's going on and have done their own research. We've had one or two people mention that tonight, who are now getting a way of focusing the stuff that they know and getting it out. And those talks start at 7 o'clock sharp and go on till 11 o'clock, because there's a lot to say and there's a lot of illustrations.
That's London, Birmingham wants to know, is the Bilderberg's goal to rule the entire world under a red flag? The capitalist and communist thing, I mean, because the capitalists are winning at the moment. Communism is kind of has had it, hasn't it?
Well, I think one of the key things we need to look at is that these terms like communist and capitalist, they give the impression of two sides, and they give the impression, therefore, that there's no connecting thread between the two.
Right.
When you look at the research, and there's many people that have researched this, you find that the people that created communism were, again, Wall Street and London. And people like Trotsky and Lenin and that whole revolution in Russia was actually funded from Wall Street and London. And the evidence and the documentation of that exists, and it's in not just my books, but other books that are operating outside the main public arena. Now, the reason for that is if you're going to divide and rule, and you're going to create conflicts, and you're going to create fear, the four-letter word that runs the world, then you need two sides to do it, or a number of sides to do it. And so what you had during that period of so-called Cold War was tremendous fear on both sides. Now, that is a wonderful form of manipulation. For instance, the spending on weapons and all that spending was far, far higher than ever it would have been had you not had the Cold War. And I talked to a guy, in fact 2 or 3 people in America who were working for the intelligence services during the Cold War. And they told me that they were staggered to find during that period that technology and technological knowledge and information was being passed from the Americans to the Russians during the Cold War.
Really?
For this reason.
Okay, very briefly, because I do want to get another call in.
For this reason. If the Russians were left to their own devices, they would have been massively, massively behind the build-up of arms and the technological and weapon capability of the West. Now, that was not a position of fear. It was certainly not a position to keep generating more and more spending with the arms industry, etc., in the West. So what they wanted was the Russians to be at parity or just in front. And the perception given of this amazingly powerful kind of Eastern Bloc that we have to be frightened of. Therefore, we have to keep our guard up, and we have to keep the weapons up. And lots of things happened during the Cold War that wouldn't have happened without it. While in the communist bloc, they were being given the same story about the West.
Right.
Classic divide and rule. And when you look at how that came to an end, Mikhail Gorbachev is an associate of David Rockefeller, major manipulator in America, and people like Henry Kissinger. And that whole bringing down of the wall, that whole breaking up of the European community, which was actually predicted 6 months before it happened in one of my books, incidentally, was about the process of the agenda of encompassing the countries of the former Soviet Union, not just into NATO, but into the European Union.